Did you know that not all people have an internal monologue? I was shocked when I first found this out a couple of weeks ago, and this idea actually was posted online to Twitter back in January, but I just found out about it, and I really am kind of shocked that some people just don't have that internal narration inside their mind. I don't know about you, but for me, I have an internal monologue or dialogue going on pretty much all the time. So it actually really surprised me to learn that some people never have that internal monologue in their heads. And so some people don't have an internal narrator at all. And what they found is that some people experience that internal monologue a lot, which is people like me, and some people experience it sometimes, and then there are some people who don't experience that internal monologue at all. And each person, the kind of person who has an internal monologue like me and the kind of person who doesn't ever have that, are both shocked to find out that the other kind of person exists. There's this idea called empathetic blindness. And basically what empathetic blindness says is that we have a really hard time imagining that other people are actually different than us and actually experience life differently than we do. It's very hard for us to imagine that. And so if you don't have an internal monologue, like some people don't, then for you, it's hard to imagine having one, and you're not really aware that the other kind of person exists. And the same is true if you have an internal monologue. Most people who have that, like me, don't realize that there's other people who don't ever have that. And so we kind of are not aware of each other. And I think it's really interesting. And so back in January, a guy with the Twitter handle of @KyoPlantEmoji posted about this, and then it kind of blew up on Twitter and then on Reddit, and then some other publications picked it up as well. And I just want to read some of the reactions to this tweet because I think they're great. So first, let's talk about the people who have internal monologues like me. So one of those kind of people said, "Wait, you mean some people don't have to suffer through the voice in their head going on a constant monologue? Is that what it means to achieve inner peace?" Yeah, it's really hard for me to imagine someone not having that. And again, I'm sure if you're the kind of person who doesn't have that internal monologue, that it's hard for you to imagine someone like me who has that voice in their head pretty much all the time. And so I want to read some reactions from people who don't have an internal monologue because that's the shocking part for me. So @Gianna L. Star says, "I'm sitting here trying to imagine what hearing your own voice in your head constantly narrating your every waking moment feels like, and I'm so effing glad my mind doesn't do this." Yeah, I mean, that basically describes what's happening to me pretty much all the time, including right now. I do have that inner monologue or dialogue narration happening in my head pretty much all the time. It doesn't really bother me, but I can imagine if you don't have that, it would be hard to imagine living that way. Witchy Twitchy says, "This is so wild to me, I can't imagine thinking in actual sentences and hearing an internal monologue. People really think in sentences?" So people who don't have an inner monologue can't believe the way that I think about things is possible even. And another thing that I find related to this, because when we start talking about the way we process information and whether or not we can think in a certain way, and there's a group of people who thinks one way and another group of people who thinks a different way, and we're not even necessarily aware of each other, that really starts to make me think about what actually makes us human. And every time we ask what makes us human and we come up with some kind of answer, it's never really a complete answer. It's one of those things that's really hard to actually answer, kind of like, what is culture? So when you talk about culture, it's kind of like, well, it's food, and it's language, and it's traditions, and it's your ethnic background, or whatever it is, whatever factors you want to say are part of culture. There's no real way to define culture definitively. It's kind of a thing that we know exists, and we can kind of know it when we see it, but it's very difficult to actually pin down a specific definition of what culture is. And I think it's the same thing with what makes us human. Every time we think like, oh, this thing is what makes us human and makes us uniquely human, it turns out that it's not exactly completely accurate. For example, there's a condition called aphantasia. I could be saying that wrong. It might be aphantasia or something like that, but I think it's called aphantasia. And people with aphantasia cannot actually visualize anything in their like mind's eye. And I can't even imagine living that way because I have an active imagination. I visualize things a lot in my mind. And so just imagine living life without being able to picture your father's face or a blue rectangle. So if I say blue rectangle, you can probably imagine that. Well, some people can't, and if they can't, then they have a condition called aphantasia. And one of the things that I used to think makes us uniquely human is being able to visualize something that hasn't happened yet and then kind of make plans to make that happen or to avoid something bad from happening. So planning for the future with our prefrontal cortex seemed to me like something that made us uniquely human, at least as far as we know, on Earth. And so when I think about people with aphantasia who can't actually imagine anything, that kind of takes away that whole part of what makes us human. And those people are definitely humans too. So what does make us human? I'm still not sure. Now, here's the thing. When we look around, like the room that we're in right now, if you just look around that room, you're actually not seeing that reality exactly as it is. What's happening is light's coming into your eyes, and then that light is processed by your brain, and your brain actually creates those images that you see of things that are out there. And so all of that is happening in your mind. So I guess even people with aphantasia are seeing something in their mind's eye because everything that we see is actually created in your brain. So they can actually do this to some degree, but they can't imagine something that isn't technically sending light into their mind to process right now. So that's what aphantasia is. And it's shocking to me that some people can't visualize things. And I have a lot of dreams. They're very vivid. I think about things all the time. I visualize things all the time. And I think it's a really cool thing to be able to do. And I wonder what it's like to have aphantasia. And so this guy named Blake Ross wrote an article on Facebook about what it's like to be blind in your mind or to have aphantasia, not being able to visualize anything. And here's another thing. Just like a lot of people who don't have an internal monologue thought that everyone was like that, and people who have internal monologues thought that everyone is like that, this guy Blake Ross, who has aphantasia, just thought everyone could not actually visualize things in their mind. And when he found out at kind of an older age that almost everyone can visualize things in their mind's eye, he was blown away. So he says, I just learned something about you and it's blowing my mind. Here it is. You can visualize things in your mind. If I tell you to imagine a beach, you can picture the golden sand and turquoise waves. If I ask for a red triangle, your mind gets to drawing. And your mom's face, of course you can visualize that. And then he says, I don't. I have never visualized anything in my entire life. I can't see my father's face, or a bouncing blue ball, my childhood bedroom, or the run I just went on 10 minutes ago. I thought counting sheep was a metaphor. I'm 30 years old and I never knew a human could do any of this, and it's blowing my mind. If you tell me to imagine a beach, I ruminate on the concept of a beach. I know there's sand, I know there's water, I know there's a sun and maybe a lifeguard. I know facts about beaches. I know a beach when I see it, and I can do verbal gymnastics with the word itself, but I cannot flash to beaches I've visited. And I grew up in Miami. So this guy, Blake Ross, cannot picture anything in his mind. And again, before I read about this, I kind of thought that being able to do that was one of the things that might have made us uniquely human. And if you get a chance, definitely check out this article by Blake Ross on Facebook about aphantasia, because it's fascinating and it's pretty long, but I think it's definitely worth reading. So if you get a second, check it out. It's really kind of mind-blowing. And so I want to get back to this question of what makes us uniquely human? What is our shared experience? What makes us all the same? There's a lot of things that make us different from each other individually, but what is it that makes us all the same? Let me know in the comments what you think makes us uniquely human, because I'm genuinely curious if anyone has a good answer to that question at this point. I'm Jim Wolf, and I'll talk to you later.